Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Simeon Vincent, and I'm a developer relations engineer here at Firefox, where I'm focusing on helping developers migrate to or bring their extensions to Firefox for Android. Today, we're going to be talking a bit about the process for setting up, testing, and debugging your extension when trying to develop on Android. So without further ado, let's get started. Our talk today is going to be divided into three main sections: the setup, development practices, and testing and debugging. In the setup section, we're going to be going over a couple of major areas: the common tools, setting up Android Studio, getting your Android device set up, and then actually getting the extension running on your device. In the bottom right there of the slide, there's Mozilla shortened URL link to help you, to take you directly to the setup information on extensionworkshop.com, which is our main website for documentation for the extension platform on Firefox. So let's take a look at some of the common tools that you're going to be needing to install. The two main things that you're going to need are Node.js and WebExt. Node.js is a open source cross-platform JavaScript runtime environment. It allows you to use JavaScript on a server or for command line tools. And that's notable because WebExt is a command line tool designed to help developers build and run their extensions. It's developed and maintained by engineers here at Mozilla, and it is necessary in order to get your extension from your local computer onto your Android device. Node.js is an interesting ecosystem that has a lot of different, it is constantly evolving. And sometimes different projects have different requirements for different Node versions. So I would personally recommend using NVM or NVM Windows in order to get a Node environment set up and easily be able to switch between Node environments depending on what project you're working with. Once you have NVM installed, you can just use NVM install node, and that will install the latest version of Node.js and make it expose it on your system path so you can use it anywhere on your command line. Similarly, once you've installed Node, you'll also get NPM, and NPM is the kind of default Node package manager in this, or default package manager in the Node.js ecosystem. And you can install WebExt by just calling npm install -- global WebExt, and that will make it globally available on your command line. Next, there are some Android tools that you'll need to install. Depending on what kind of setup you're targeting, you may want to install Android Studio, or you may just want to install ADB. ADB is short for Android Debug Bridge, and it's the command line tool that Google developed to facilitate debugging and communicating with an Android device. And it's used for both physical and virtual devices. Android Studio is a bit of a heavyweight tool, so you may not want to install it. But, sorry, I just realized my slides have out of NVM information. Android Studio is a bit of a heavyweight tool, so you may not want to install Android Studio on the whole. But if you are planning to develop using virtual devices, I would encourage you'll need to install Android Studio. And in particular, I want to highlight that it is very useful to have virtual devices. That way you can test a variety of different screen sizes and types of Android devices. So for the purpose of this talk, we're going to be assuming that we're setting up Android Studio. So let's take a look at the process required to get Android Studio up and running. I just heard it say recording in progress, so I think I'm going to start over. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the talk. My name is Simeon Vincent, and I'm a developer relations engineer here on the Firefox team. I am excited to talk to you today about the process of getting set up and get running with developing extensions for Firefox for Android. The talk today is going to be divided into three main sections. First, the initial setup. Second, the development. And third, testing and debugging in extension. The setup process is going to be divided into 6 main chunks. Common tools that you'll need to install to get your environment set up. Setting up Android Studio. Setting up the Android device. And finally, getting the extension running on Android. And all of these instructions are heavily inspired by the web extension documentation, browser extension documentation that we have available at extensionworkshop.com. That link in the bottom right will take you directly to that content. So let's dive in. In order to get up and running, you're going to need a couple of common tools that aren't specific to Android development. Namely, you're going to need Node.js and WebExt. Node.js is a cross-platform JavaScript runtime that can be used to develop CLI tools or run Node.js on a web server. In our case, we are particularly interested in the ability for other JavaScript developers to make custom tools, namely WebExt, which was developed and is maintained by Mozilla. And this tool is going to be necessary for us to get our extension that we develop on our computer onto our Android device. So the Node.js ecosystem can be a little bit volatile isn't the right word, but it's constantly evolving. That there are different Node.js runtimes coming out, and they have different capabilities, different language features. And depending on which project you're working with, the project may expect different versions of Node.js in order to work as expected. So I would highly encourage you to use a Node version manager. And my personal preference is for NVM, but there are a variety of other ones out there. NVM on macOS and Linux, and NVM Windows on Windows. Whatever tool you choose to use, you should be able to, once it's installed, you can use a command line, or you can invoke a command like nvm install node, and that will install the latest version of Node.js for your system. Next, WebExt, as I said, is a command line tool developed by Mozilla. And once you've installed Node, that also comes along with npm, which is the standard package manager on in the Node.js ecosystem. And you can install WebExt by executing the command npm install -- global WebExt, and that will make the WebExt tool globally available on the command line. Next, we're going to need to set up some Android-specific tooling. Now, in order to debug an Android device, you have to have ADB installed, or Android Debug Bridge. This is a tool developed by Google as part of the Android open source project. You can optionally also install Android Studio. Android Studio is incredibly useful for being able to get up and running and testing on multiple different devices, because it supports virtual devices. So I'd encourage folks, if you have the space and time to be able to install Android Studio, I'd encourage you to go that route, because it's going to give you more flexibility in your testing down the road. So let's take a look at the Android Studio install and setup process. First, head over to android.com and download the latest version of Android Studio. The install process is pretty standard, so I'm just going to skip over most of that and focus on a couple of the configurations settings post-install that you'll need to set up. So here, tap the More Actions option and then go into the SDK Manager. From here, we're going to go to the SDK Tools tab and make sure that Android SDK Platform Tools is installed. Once that has been installed, you'll also need to make sure that the SDK Platform Tools directory is exposed on your system's path in order for ADB to be available on the command line. Instructions on how to use this are platform dependent, so I'd encourage you to do a Google search or something after in order to figure out how exactly to set it up for your system. Next, let's take a look at creating some virtual devices. For the purpose of this talk, we're going to assume that we're working with a virtual device because it makes things a little bit easier. So from the Android Studio welcome screen, select More Actions and Virtual Device Manager. Inside that, you're going to create a device, and when given the option, you'll need to pick a hardware image that you want to emulate. Regardless of what you choose, I would personally recommend going for an option that has the Play Store. So you're going to look for the Google Play Store icon, and then you're going to click next through a number of other screens. I want to call this one out because it tripped me up a little bit when I was getting started. This screen requires you to download a system image, and that isn't entirely obvious. So I would suggest just selecting the row that has the highest Android API level and downloading that image. In this case, at the time the talk is being recorded, that's API 34. So once you've downloaded that, you can select that row and then click Next. After a bit, the device will get installed and set up, and then you can use the play button on the device manager screen in order to actually run your virtual device. And from there, now you have a full Android phone running on your computer. Congrats. Next, in order to actually get your extension running on an Android device, you're going to need to configure the device's settings, going through a couple different menus to enable debug modes. So first, start by opening the system settings, scroll down to the About emulated device. Again, this is an emulated device, so the string used for a normal device, I think, would just say About device. So tap into the About section, and then scroll down to the build number near the bottom. Tap that a few times until you see that message in the bottom right corner that says, "You are now a developer." Once you've done that, you've enabled developer mode at the OS level. And now we'll need to configure a couple of settings related to the developer mode. So back out of that menu, you'll be brought back to the settings list. Scroll down to the system option, and inside the system menu, scroll down to the developer options. Once you're there, you'll want to scroll down and enable USB debugging, or if you're on a physical device, you might want to use wireless debugging because that might make life a little bit easier. Next, we're going to actually install Firefox nightly on the Android device and enable remote debugging in Firefox. So from the Google Play Store, you're going to open the Google Play Store. You're going to need to log in. Unfortunately, this does require you to have a Google account that you log into. But once you've done that, you can search for and install Firefox. Once Firefox is installed, go through the initial welcome screen. And then once you're on the initial Firefox homepage, tap the vertical 3-dot menu in the bottom right corner, select Settings, and then in the Settings menu, scroll down to About Firefox Nightly. Inside that screen, tap the Firefox logo a few times until you see the Debug Mode Enabled message appear at the bottom of the screen. Then back out into the settings list and look for the Remote Debugging via USB option. Once you've enabled that, then your Android device is configured and ready to go. So now all that's left is to actually get the extension running. We previously talked about WebExt and ADB. assuming you've already exposed ADB on your command line and you've installed Node.js and gotten WebEx globally installed, you can navigate into the directory that contains your extension, the distributable version of your extension, and use WebEx run. As you might guess, the run command tells web extension to run your extension on a given version of a browser. The -T here is the target flag. So we're telling WebEx to run this on Firefox for Android. The Android device, if you don't have that specified when you run the command, if you just run it with the T flag, WebEx will tell you that it doesn't know what device to connect to, and it will list all of the devices that are available. In this case, since we're using an emulated version, I already know the ID, so I provide that as Android device equals emulator, blah, blah, blah. And then finally, if you have multiple different Firefox APKs, different Android versions of Firefox installed on your device, you will need to specify which version you want to run. So in my case, I had both Firefox Android, both Firefox Nightly and Firefox Standard installed. So I needed to specify org Mozilla Firefox in order to get my extension running in Firefox. Next, on the device itself, this is what you will see. In this case, I was visiting extensionworkshop.com, and the pop-up that appears at the bottom of the screen notifies me that the extension that I'm going to be debugging is installed and available on the device. So I can tap OK, got it, and then I'll be able to continue browsing the web normally. On the Firefox side, in order to connect to the device and begin debugging, I'll need to visit About Debugging and then enable USB devices. This is a one-time setup. So once you've done this, you won't need to come back and do it again. Once you've enabled USB devices, you will see a list of devices on the left, and you can choose which one you want to connect to. Again, as I mentioned, I had both Firefox Nightly and normal Firefox installed, so I can choose which one I want to connect to debug. Next, let's talk about some development practices to keep in mind when building an extension on Firefox for Android. We're going to look at a couple of different topics, in particular, Manifest v2 versus Manifest v3, what event pages, some particular behaviors of event pages, how event listeners are handled, general guidance with developing your UI on a mobile device, some notable behavior differences between Firefox Desktop and Firefox for Android, and a couple of known issues that you might want to keep an eye out for. First, on the topic of Manifest v2 versus Manifest v3, our current recommendation is that you target Manifest v2. And the main reason for this is that most of the capabilities that you are potentially looking for in Manifest v3 are already supported in Manifest v2, or will be supported as we add support for them in Manifest v3. Notably, Firefox's support for Manifest v3 is still a work in progress, so there's a decent number of gaps that we still need to fill and address. But the particular issue that the main reason that we're encouraging you to develop and target Manifest v2 is that the initial version of Firefox for Android that supports extensions or broad availability of extensions doesn't allow users to configure host permissions. So in order to give the user full control over their experience, Manifest v2 is currently the preferred target. Another notable issue, or another notable development topic to keep in mind when developing extensions for Firefox is that in both Manifest v2 and Manifest v3, with the introduction of Manifest v3, Firefox added support for event pages. And event pages have been available on Chrome for a while, but Firefox has historically only supported persistent background pages. That said, the main reason that we're introducing event pages is because it better matches the development expectations, the runtime expectations of the operating system on Android. In particular, Firefox, or in particular on Android, secondary processes can be terminated or reclaimed when they're not absolutely needed. So if there's memory pressure or CPU pressure and the device isn't able to get as much done in the small amount of time that it has, it will terminate other background processes in order to free up resources and keep the user experience responsive. As a result, even if you have a persistent background page, your extension process will be terminated. That's something that we just can't avoid. So by choosing to opt into the event page model, you're better aligning your extension with how the platform itself is going to behave. And notably, this does require a manual opt-in on your part as a developer. So you'll need to, when you specify your background in your extension manifest, you'll need to set persistent false. Notably, in manifest v3, persistent is assumed to be false. But in manifest v2, you have to explicitly choose to enable this feature. So please do. It will better help you better understand how the extension platform is working. It will lead to less surprises and subtle bugs. Directly related to that, event listeners should be registered at the top level of your background script, or more specifically, synchronously on the first execution of your background script. Because the extension process can and will be terminated, one of the things that you need to be aware of is that the extension, that Firefox will try to restart your extension process in response to interesting events or things that that your extension has added listeners for. And if you are not registering the event listener at the top level, Firefox can't necessarily know that the extension is prepared to receive that message, and therefore it won't start it. So as a simple example, if you were to fetch some storage from your, fetch a value from your local storage, and then you wanted to use that in a web navigation handler, this flow would not cause, this registration style would mean that your on before navigate event listener doesn't actually get registered when expected, and therefore won't be started in response to on before navigate events. I also just realized that I have a typo in this, and I, as written, this won't work. Browser web navigation on before navigate. I'm missing a .add listener call. Just pretend it's there. So instead, what you would need to do is have your on before navigate event listener registered outside of the browser storage local call, and then have the browser storage local call set a global state, and then retrieve, feed that into the event handler for on before navigate. More generally, when developing an extension, we're strongly encouraging you to use best practices for mobile web development. One of the most common issues that developers encounter when they when they first bring their extensions over to Android is that their pop-up will, that the extensions action pop-up will render as a very, very small zoomed out window. And that's just a kind of web development 101 problem. So it's super easy to fix that. As an example, I've been looking, or the extension that I've been testing showing off in these screenshots so far is Rob Wu's CRX Viewer, which is a great tool for helping debug and investigate what a published extension contains, like the source code that it contains. So in that case, he's using a browser action, a page action, which is why this icon is in the toolbar. And when you click that, you can see that the pop-up shows download as zip or view source. And that looks great and works just as you would expect on desktop. But when you load this in mobile, it is extremely small. And the reason for that is that we haven't actually declared that the page should be rendered in a special way on mobile. And a very standard, easy way to fix that is to drop in a meta tag for the viewport that sets the width of the display to the device's width. And with that simple change, the UI is much better and fits in line with user expectations. So in general, following mobile design practices allows you to scale your UI across both desktop and mobile. And that's strongly encouraged. That way you have a single code base that works across all of the places where it could potentially be installed. Directly related to that, we recommend that you use feature detection in your extension for both web platform features and extension platform features. So for example, if you normally have a, let's say a window manager that has a on-created event listener, and that's how your extension was designed to work on desktop, one of the differences between the extension platform on Android and the extension platform on desktop is that the Windows API isn't exposed due to some lower level concerns that led to the each tab on Android as being exposed in its own dedicated window. Since Windows don't have a meaningful concept there, we simply don't expose it. The way that you would work around that is by using feature detection. So on Android, you would check if the browser.windows namespace is available at all. And if it is, then set up your listener one way. And if it's not, set up your listener another way. In this case, we're using feature detection to have branching logic to accomplish the same goal, just in slightly different ways. As I mentioned, there are some notable behavior differences between the desktop version of Firefox and the web mobile version of Firefox. Not all web extension APIs are supported on mobile. I specifically mentioned the Windows API, but there are a couple others, such as native messaging. And you can see a full list of you can see a full compatibility table across different browsers, including Firefox for Android and Firefox Desktop, by visiting the link here at the bottom. I also mentioned previously that persistent background pages can be terminated without notice on Firefox for Android. So that's another major consideration to keep in mind. And again, a reason that we encourage you to use event pages rather than persistent background pages when building extensions for mobile. Okay, let's take a look at a couple of different known issues that might trip you up as you're developing on Android. So sometimes content scripts won't appear in the sources list. If that happens, the workaround is to add a debugger statement to the top of your content script. That will cause the debugger to immediately pause when your content script is loaded, and therefore make sure that that file is loaded in developer tools. Sometimes you can't debug, or one of the current issues that we're aware of is that you can't debug an extension's pop-up on Android. You can view the source files, but breakpoints that you set won't actually be tripped. So the workaround for that is to open the pop-up in a new tab and debug it as if it were a normal tab. Another issue that we're aware of, sources aren't updated in the developer tools after you've made a change. So even though the WebEx command line tool will automatically reload the extension whenever you make changes to the file, it'll reload it on your device. Unfortunately, those changes aren't reflected in developer tools. So as a temporary workaround, one of the things you could do is close and reopen developer tools. When you do that, your breakpoints will be preserved. So there's no, in that respect, there's no loss of data. Now, sometimes when you try to reconnect to developer tools, you'll get a destroyed actor error message that prevents you from reconnecting. Luckily, that is also relatively easy to fix. Simply disconnect from the device and then reconnect on the About Debugging page. Once you've done that, you should be able to open developer tools again without issue. Sometimes an extension won't appear in the temporary extensions list on About Debugging. When that happens, again, the solution is pretty straightforward. Just disconnect and reconnect. All right. With all of that said, let's take a look at a couple of issues related to testing and debugging your extension on Android. So first, I want to take a quick look at remote debugging in Firefox Developer Tools. So once you've enabled USB debugging, you'll have a list of devices on the left that you can connect to. When you click the Connect button, you should see a list of temporary extensions. If you have WebEx installed and running, and it has loaded your extension on the device, you will see a temporary extension there. So you can click the Inspect button in order to open the Developer Tools window. If you're not familiar, this is what it looks like. The developer tools that you know and love are exposed, but in this case, as a tab instead of as a dedicated sub-window or separate window. If we go over to the sources, the debug tab, we can see a list of the sources on the left, and you can drop breakpoints and begin interacting with your background script directly from here. Now, on my test device, if I go to the extensions pop-up menu by selecting the three-dot menu, going to add-ons, and then selecting my extension, I can see a couple of new sources appear in the left. These are the scripts that have been loaded by the pop-up. You can also see that a new button appears in the top right. This button allows you to switch between the different debug contexts, the different windows that are open. And that's particularly helpful for when you're trying to inspect exactly what's going on in different page contexts. So that's a quick crash course on basic features for debugging an extension in Firefox DevTools. When developing an extension for Firefox for Android, one of the main things that I want to encourage you to do is test your experience on different devices, either physical devices or virtual. Again, Android Studio is a great tool for helping you get set up and test your experience across a variety of different device sizes and potentially OS versions as well. One of the things to keep in mind when developing an extension and trying to get real-world experience before getting it in the hands of users is that in order to distribute an extension on Android, it has to be publicly listed on Android or addons.mozilla.org. If you, unfortunately, one of the ways that developers will sometimes distribute their extensions and try to encourage real-world users to test an extension before it's ready is by publishing an unlisted version of their add-on on AMO. If you do that, that version is unfortunately not available to be installed on Firefox for Android. It has to be public. So the way you can accommodate that is by submitting your pre-release version as a new add-on on addons.mozilla.org. When doing that, it's probably best to explicitly label it as a pre-release or beta or Android test or something. That way users have a better expectation of why this is separate and what they're getting into when they go to install it. And with that, I'd like to open it up to Q&A. Thank you very much for joining. And if you are interested, if you have any questions about the extension development process, I'd strongly encourage you to go to discourse.mozilla.org. You can also reach out to us at the white links here on X or on Mastodon, Mozilla at mozilla.social, and MozAMO on X/Twitter. You can also reach me directly, .proto@toot.cafe and at .proto on Twitter. As I said, we're going to be hanging around for a couple minutes to get some questions. Feel free to post comments on the wherever you're watching this, and our Ed, I forgot your title. I'm sorry. Our community manager, Ed, is going to be gathering questions up and posting them so we can follow up. In the meantime, I want to thank you all for coming, and I appreciate your attention.
Great job, Simeon. I'm checking the various live stream platforms currently, and I am not seeing any questions, but let's give it another minute or so and see if any of the attendees have anything that needs clarity.
All right. Just a quick update. We're scanning the different channels that this is being presented on and looking for any new comments or questions that developers have. Again, if you want to follow up, your best course is probably on the Mozilla discourse. If you're watching this asynchronously, we try to be pretty responsive there and answer developer questions. Also, the community answers questions from each other all the time. So if you are an experienced Firefox developer and want to give a hand, I'd also encourage you to pop in there and see if there's anybody that you can share some information with. I think with that, we're going to wrap it up. So in the next day or so, we're going to post the slides for this talk in the comment or in the comments in the description, wherever you're watching this video. And I think that's it. Thank you again for coming, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.